right. Well, we're pretty excited today. We know that Canadians have been feeling really squeezed. We've been hearing these stories again and again. People are sharing how are they ever going to be able to find a way to pay for their rent or their mortgage and higher costs for groceries, and they're worried about the cost of heating their homes. In all of that, what we have seen again and again throughout the summer, the best way to get a powerful paycheck is with a powerful union fighting for workers to get a fair share. That is the best way. But we know that for decades, New Democrats and the labor movement, we've been fighting hard to make sure that workers are able to fight for that fair share. And one of the barriers that has severely impacted workers is when a worker makes that tough decision to go on strike. And the employer undermines that strike by hiring a scab worker, a replacement worker. That undermines the power of the worker demanding fairness. So what is going to be tabled today, after decades of fight, and I want to thank the labor leaders that are here today, I want to thank my NDP caucus that's here today. After decades of battle, after decades of fighting, we are finally going to see a government bill that we forced to make happen that's going to ban scab workers in our country. This is about giving power to workers, taking away power from greedy CEOs and making sure workers can fight to get a fair share of the profits that they create with their own labor. So we're really proud of that. This legislation will be tabled today. The next step, though, is getting it passed, because we know that the corporate-controlled conservatives aren't going to want to see workers have more power, that their corporate masters aren't going to want to see this legislation get passed. So we're going to have to keep on putting the pressure on. But I want to make one thing really clear. The Liberals would never have done this. They would have never tabled this legislation but for the fact that New Democrats and Labour together fought to make this happen. And we know, as I mentioned yesterday, that the corporate coalition of Liberals and Conservatives may strike again. They might find ways to weaken this. So we're going to fight hard with amendments to strengthen it. We're going to fight hard to make sure this gets through Parliament and gets passed so that all workers in Canada know that at the federal level, we have set the standard that we are going to ban scab workers, and then we hope to see this spread across the country. We want to see more jurisdictions pass this to protect workers, to give them more power so they can demand better wages, better work conditions, so they can deal with the cost of living. And we've got their back. We've shown again and again we are proudly a party that was created by workers, and now we're showing that by delivering more protection for workers. Merci. Donc, on sait qu'on est dans une crise d'abordabilité. C'est tellement difficile pour les familles. Ils ont de la misère à rejoindre les deux bouts. Les coûts des loyers sont augmentés, les coûts d'épicerie augmentés. Donc, les gens ont des grandes difficultés à trouver des façons de payer toutes les factures. Mais on sait que la façon la plus puissante de gagner un bon salaire, c'est d'avoir un syndicat, de devenir membre d'un syndicat puissant pour demander un salaire juste. Et on sait qu'il y a une grande barrière pour les travailleurs quand ils prennent la décision difficile d'aller en grève. La grande barrière, c'est des employeurs qui embauchent les anti-briseurs de grève. Et ça, c'est un grand problème. Donc, après des décennies de bataille, je veux saluer les leaders de mouvements syndicats qui sont avec moi aujourd'hui, mon caucus NPD qui sont avec moi aujourd'hui. Ensemble, après des décennies de bataille, on a finalement forcé ce gouvernement de présenter un projet de loi pour mettre fin aux briseurs de grève, un projet de loi anti-briseurs de grève. Bravo. Ça va donner plus de pouvoir pour les travailleurs de demander des salaires et des conditions de travail justes. On est tellement fiers Mais la prochaine étape va d'assurer qu'on fait passer ce projet de loi. Et on sait que les conservateurs vont essayer de bloquer ce projet de loi parce qu'ils sont contrôlés par les grandes entreprises. Donc, ils ne veulent pas donner plus de pouvoir aux travailleurs. On sait que dans le passé, les libéraux aussi ont voté contre un projet de loi anti-briseur de grève en 2016 avec les conservateurs. Donc, on va continuer à mettre la pression, mais je dois clarifier que sans avoir la pression du mouvement syndical, sans avoir la pression des néo-démocrates, sans avoir notre position de pouvoir dans ce gouvernement, dans ce Parlement, les libéraux n'auraient jamais présenté ce projet de loi. C'est grâce aux néo-démocrates et mouvements syndicaux que ce projet de loi a été déposé aujourd'hui. Donc, on est tellement fiers aujourd'hui qu'on a forcé le gouvernement de faire ça. On va continuer de mettre la pression. On va continuer de chercher des victoires, des gains pour monsieur, madame, tout le monde. Donc, je suis prêt pour vos questions. I'm ready for any questions you might have. Oh, sorry, before the questions, I got too excited. It's an exciting day. We're really pumped. But I'm also very pumped to introduce the leader of the Canadian Labour Congress, who represents all the workers of the country, and my dear friend who's been a fierce advocate for this bill being presented and being passed, Bea Bruske.
Good morning. I want to start off by thanking Jagmeet and the NDP for the work that they've done in ensuring that this legislation is effective and that it's a top priority for government. We've seen years of record corporate profits while workers' wages have been lagging behind. Workers are rightly demanding fairer wages, better safety standards, and respect from their employers. Today's legislation, which is the tireless work of the NDP, bans the use of scabs or replacement workers in the federal sector, and it will greatly help bring fairness to workplaces right across Canada. The legislation will lead to less labour disruptions, fewer work stoppages, and will help build a more balanced economy while increasing benefits and respect that workers deserve through swifter negotiations with employers. The use of scab workers undermines fair and transparent collective bargaining by tipping the balance of power to the employer. This often leads to longer and more contentious work disruptions. Canada's unions have long called for robust, enforceable legislation that would close any existing loopholes and leave no room for interpretation by employers. In order to truly protect workers and their right to strike, anti-scab legislation must apply to any work regularly performed by bargaining unit workers to ensure that it is effective. And it's important that the legislation doesn't deny workers the right to legally strike by creating more essential service barriers that have strong enforcement mechanisms to ensure adherence. The legislation also needs to be amended to bring urgent protections into force immediately upon adoption. Workers across the country have long called for anti-scab legislation for many decades, and it's been the missing piece in Canada's federal labour law. We welcome today's urgent legislation, and the need for government now is for all parties to strengthen, adopt, and swiftly pass this legislation and bring it into force so that workers can get the rights that they deserve and level the playing field at the bargaining tables. Hear, hear, hear.
And I'm also really, really proud to be able to introduce the president of the United Steelworkers, another partner that's been fighting so hard to see this bill presented, and it's my great honor to present Marty Warren.
Thank you. I want to start off almost where Bea did as well. I cannot thank, as Steelworkers, again, I'm Marty Warren, the Canadian National Director. My pronouns are he and him, but I want to start off by thanking Jagmeet, the NDP, and the caucus for what you've done. Thank you. As steelworkers, we have fought for this legislation for decades because we know the effect it has on collective bargaining when companies can just opt out and scab out the work of working people or families. And I also, before I go much further, I want to give an example. Bea, I want to thank you for your leadership, the voice of the labour in Canada. Bea, CLC, thank you so much. Without those two working hard on this, we wouldn't be here today. And It's just so, so important. And let me tell you why. An example of, as of Monday, you can remember when Rogers took over Shaw, it was going to be great for workers. We were going to add 3,000 new jobs and workers were going to be good. Well, on Monday, Steelworkers bargained what was once a Shaw location, trying to bargain for 300 members, that's 300 families, for a new collective agreement with Rogers. And on Monday, they locked us out. Shame. Yep, they locked us out. So now what's going to happen? Emotions go high in the community. It splits the community between those that are, scabbing the work out and you watching as your jobs, or people walk by and stealing your jobs and you have no way to feed your family. It's going to prolong the labor dispute. And at the very end of it all, it's going to take decades to restore labor relations. So I just want to make sure people understand the importance of this legislation. It helps labor relations. It stops from employers cutting out and taking the easy way out. It forces them to say it.
You have to make a pause for the parade, please. We'll resume right after.
Oh, no. We knew this was going to happen. Sorry. At least I'm not here. Or to the left. We're good. I'm way over here. There we go. I'm back. Anyways, yeah. I do want to finish up because we do want time for questions again. I just want to again express how important this is to level the playing field for working people when they're in collective bargaining, and how important it is around future labor relations when the contract ends. We see so often the people that make the decision, or the CEO is not from the community, leaves the town, the community struggles, the workplace struggles with poor labor relations for decades. So this legislation is so important. I want to thank the NDP again, as well as the Liberals, for introducing the bill. Thank you.
A big thank you again to Bea Bruske and Marty Warren, and to my NDP team, and to other labor leaders that are here today that are joining us. With that, we're ready for any questions you might have.
What isn't in the legislation that you would have liked to see?
Well, we would have wanted the bill to be even stronger in terms of providing even better protections for workers. But this is something we can be proud of. It includes a lot of elements that were not present in other legislations. One example is with the ability to work remotely, there was some concern that working remotely would not be covered. And in some other legislations in other provinces, it's not covered as clearly. We've clearly addressed that should not be in any way be allowed. So that's a piece that we were able to get in there. We'll look at the legislation more carefully when it's tabled. So technically it's not actually tabled yet. And then we'll look at some of the elements that might be missing. We've got the opportunity after second reading to make those amendments in committee, but we'll look carefully at the law to make sure it's going to meet the needs of workers, and that's what we're going to see very shortly.
Monsieur, Conseil des relations industrielles, êtes-vous déçu du rôle qui est donné au Conseil des relations industrielles?
Il y a des éléments dans ce qu'on a entendu que si c'était un gouvernement néo-démocrate, qu'on aurait changé. Parce que pour nous, on doit équilibrer plus de pouvoir pour les travailleurs. Donc, ce sont des éléments qu'on va voir quand on a tous les détails, quand le projet de loi est déposé. Et puis, on a une opportunité pour les amendes. Mais on doit être clair que sans avoir les néo-démocrates, les libéraux n'auraient jamais introduit ce projet de loi, n'auraient jamais interdit les briseurs de grève. On est fiers, mais il y a du travail qui reste.
D'entrée de jeu, monsieur.
To get this set up for a regulatory framework. So are you concerned this could take some time to get implemented here once the legislation is passed? Like, how long will workers, in your view, be unprotected without this law being passed, or is that something that is false? I don't know.
We're going to be working as hard as possible to make this passed as quickly as possible, but there will be barriers, and I want to be clear about those barriers. One, we know that the corporate-controlled Conservatives are not going to want to see this bill pass. So we're going to see their tactics to slow it down and to block it. That's going to be a problem. We also know that that corporate coalition of Liberals and Conservatives might strike again. To remind folks, in 2016, the Liberals and Conservatives did team up to vote against anti-scab legislation. So they have a history of opposing it. So we're going to be very carefully monitoring and watching to see if there's any barriers, any slowdowns, and we're going to be constantly pushing to get this passed as quickly as possible. I've seen the reports that folks are estimating it could take up to a year. We want this done as quickly as possible, and we'll be doing everything we can to speed it up.
That it's already so hard to use replacement workers in federally regulated workplaces. Why is this bill necessary? And can you give some examples over like maybe the past 5 to 10 years of when this legislation would have stopped federally regulated employers from using scabs?
I don't need to go back 5 years. I can tell you right now. We have the one story already from Marty talked about workers right now that are locked out at Rogers. They're going to be replacement workers coming in. That's going to undermine their ability to get a fair deal. It's going to lengthen the labor dispute. Right now, across the river in Gatineau, Videotron workers are locked out, and they're also up against replacement workers. This is going to protect almost 1 million workers in our country, and that is significant. Close to 1 million federally regulated workers will benefit from this protection, and there are already examples right now of workers that are suffering from replacement workers that are undermining scab workers, that are undermining their ability to get a fair contract. Like both Bea and Marty mentioned, it will lengthen the dispute, more pain for the families, more pain for the workers and their families, and this is something we can avoid, and that's why we want to see this bill passed as quickly as possible.
Je peux te poser une question, s'il vous plaît? Je suis tannée. Je suis vraiment tannée. Vous avez parlé d'entrée de jeu que vous craignez que cette législation-là, cette loi-là puisse être affaiblie. Qu'est-ce qui vous fait craindre ça, d'une part? Qu'est-ce que vous craignez qu'il soit affaibli? Puis qu'est-ce que ça dit sur votre relation avec les libéraux que le projet de loi n'est pas déposé, que déjà vous émettez là, des craintes?
C'est une question importante parce que ça montre vraiment la relation. Dans tout le travail qu'on fait dans ce gouvernement minoritaire avec le pouvoir qu'on a, ce n'est pas des conversations polites, c'est une bataille. On force le gouvernement, on met la pression sur le gouvernement. C'est une lutte toujours. Et on est prêt de lutter, on est prêt de forcer sur le gouvernement de faire ce qu'il faut. Mais on a plusieurs exemples où le gouvernement a choisi d'aider les grandes entreprises au lieu des travailleurs. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi on a des craintes, parce qu'on a de la preuve. Un exemple clé, c'est le fait qu'avec les prix des médicaments, l'organisme qui fixe les prix des médicaments au Canada, plusieurs membres ont démissionné pour manifester contre le gouvernement libéral qui a choisi d'aider les grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques au lieu de monsieur, madame, tout le monde. Donc, on sait que ce gouvernement libéral et ce premier ministre souvent choisi d'aider les grandes entreprises au lieu des travailleurs. Donc, ça, c'est une crainte qui existe, mais on ne lâche pas. On va continuer de mettre la pression, on va continuer de lutter et on a beaucoup d'espoir qu'on va gagner pour les travailleurs dans ces batailles.
Vous parlez du plus rapidement possible pour l'adoption, mais est-ce que vous avez une date butoir? Voulez-vous que ce soit adopté avant un certain moment, avant les prochaines élections, ou c'est quoi votre échéancier, si vous en avez?
C'est assez tôt que possible, parce que c'est une question de protection pour les travailleurs. Donc, notre volonté, c'est d'avoir un projet de loi passer dans le Parlement et mettre en force aussi tôt que possible. Ça, c'est notre but. Donc, oui, bien sûr, avant d'une élection, parce qu'on veut voir cette protection pour les gens. Donc, on va continuer de faire le travail nécessaire pour réaliser ça.
Mr. Singh,
Yeah.
a bill of this type was in the Liberal election platform. What is in this bill that is only because of the NDP agreement with the Liberals?
Let's be really clear. The Liberals were never going to do this. They put in place many times in their campaign pharmacare, and now they voted against it when we put it to a vote. They put many things in their campaign that does not mean that they were going to do it. And we've got many examples of what they promised to do and they broke their promise. They promised numerous things. They promised clean drinking water for Indigenous people. Still haven't done that. They promised pharmacare in multiple elections, 2019 and in 2021, and are still reluctant to do it. So just because the Liberals promised something should never be taken as it's going to happen. The reality is this is directly a result of what we forced the government to do. We put it in writing that they had to do it, and it's being done now. They voted against it in 2016. They were never going to do it unless we forced them to, and now it's happening.
What specifically are you concerned? What specifically are you
This is a new question, maybe.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
Mr. Singh, there's been a lot of protests since the war broke out in the Middle East, and some have said that pro-Palestinian supporters have faced repercussions just for their position. Is that a concern that you share?
I have expressed concerns about this, and I want to make our position really clear. People should be able to express their concerns about people dying, of their loved ones that are not in safety, and should be able to express that concern and not face any repercussions for that. And I know that's happening with people who have connections to the Palestinian community, Muslim communities who have raised concerns, and simply for raising concerns are being considered terrorists or being affiliated with Hamas or sympathizing Hamas, which is unfair. It's a terrorist organization that many people condemn, and so it's unfair to do that. Similarly, we know that a lot of Jewish Canadians are seeing a rise of anti-Semitism and are being connected with the actions of the extremist Netanyahu government, which they have nothing to do with. And so it's very important that we all remember our shared humanity, that we take a moment to connect to the fact that there's a lot of people going through pain right now, and no one should feel afraid of expressing their thoughts because of the pain they're experiencing, and no one should be a victim of any sort of violence or hatred because of who they are. The articles of faith they wear, the faith that they practice, the religion that they express, none of that should result in violence or hatred towards them, and I'm deeply concerned about that as a trend that's going on.
Your own party said that the red line in this legislation was essential services. If there's any mention of that, you guys would pull your support. Is it safe to say, by the fact that everyone's smiling and happy right now, that that is not in the legislation?
That's correct. That the minimum requirements, as far as we're aware, again, technically the bill is not going to be released until very shortly. And so as far as we know, the minimum requirements that should be there are there. We're going to be very carefully paying attention to the details in the law. And we also have an opportunity in committee to amend them. But let's be clear. We're seeing the government present anti-scab legislation today because the labor movement and New Democrats forced them to do it. We're proud of that, but we're not going to let up the pressure because we want to see this pass.
The Minister of Transportation has summoned Air Canada to the Hill today to have a discussion after some terrible stories that CBC has reported about the treatment of disabled people. What would you like to see the Minister of Transportation and Air Canada do about this issue?
Well, I want to acknowledge Benita Zarrillo's really strong work on this. She's been very vocal on this point. The reality is, for people living with disabilities, if their mobility device in any way is damaged, that is completely wrong. That should never happen. Their mobility device should be treated with the utmost care. No one should ever worry if they're flying that the device that they need to get around is in any way going to be damaged. That should never be a concern, and that should never be allowed to happen. And there should be an immediate policy change to ensure that it never happens, that there is the right precautions taken. And I look forward to seeing some real justice on this, because no one in our country should be afraid to fly, that they're going to be stranded without the ability to move around once they get off the plane. That's wrong, and that should not happen. Oh, sorry, that was the last question. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. Merci. Thank you all.